From the Toronto Star, I'm Raju Mudhar, and this matters.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Like that famous trailer from 1957 tells us to, it's time to get your popcorn ready. For the first time since March, new movies are back in the theaters. The latest from Christopher Nolan, Tenet, is now open in Canada. And while there's a 50-person seating limit per theater to help with physical distancing, the big question is, are you comfortable enough to go and catch a flick? Like with everything, this pandemic has upended the film industry, with big films already jumping straight to streaming services, and the window from a theatrical release to video on demand getting smaller all the time. As well, while many film festivals around the world have been cancelled, the Toronto International Film Festival is soldiering on, and will be here in a few weeks, but it will be very different from previous years. To discuss all of this, we are joined by Peter Howell. He is the former movie critic for The Star and president of the Toronto Film Critics Association. He's now reviewing movies at his own site, nightviz.ca. Peter, thank you so much for being on This Matters.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you again.
It really is. Now, let's start with Tenet, which is, I think, a hard thing to talk about because I haven't seen it, but can I get your quick, spoiler-free thoughts?
Sure. Basically, the easy answer is if you've seen Christopher Nolan's sort of artier, kind of more intrigue films, like this as opposed to the Batman ones, if you like movies like Interstellar and the other one's totally blanking on right now.
Inception.
Yes, Inception. If you like those two, you'll love this one. Also Memento earlier on. This one makes the other ones just look like an easy junior crossword puzzle. This is like the Sunday Times difficult crossword puzzle. That's actually Kenneth Branagh, one of the members. He plays the bad guy. He described it as a crossword puzzle, and it's a real mind bender. I found it really satisfying because, you get so tired of movies where you already know how they're going to end from the moment they start. And you really don't know how this one's going to end. And I'm still not quite sure how it ended.
Now, you spoke with the actor John David Washington, and he said that people should see this movie 5 times. Is that just savvy marketing?
It might be, because I guess they're trying to cause seeing as how you can't have full movie theaters at the moment, maybe they're trying to, up the body count that way by having you see it multiple times. But it is the kind of movie you're going to want to see at least 2 or 3 times if you're serious about deciphering it. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot of what I consider to be red herrings and sort of false leads and things like that. But there's a very interesting kind of philosophical concept about space and time and our place in it. And even things like your usual spy movie intrigues about betrayals and double crosses and things like that, human nature. There's some great action scenes. There's some fantastic action scenes, like scaling onto a building and things like that. Really clever stuff that you don't always see in every one of these movies. But, he's a really accomplished filmmaker, and he's just goes from strength to strength. But I do have to tell people that if you're not dialed into his wavelength right now, you might find this a tough one to go on. Like, you really sort of need to be familiar with his earlier stuff to really understand where he's coming from.
Christopher Nolan is all about theaters, and I know that he believes this is meant to be seen on IMAX. Is it fair that some of the pressure being put on this film as the thing that gets people back into the theaters during this pandemic?
I think it's fair because, he's a true believer in the big screen. Now, I did see this on an IMAX screen, and I really enjoyed that experience, but I think you could see it on almost any size screen. I don't think you wouldn't want to watch it on your phone, but I think you could watch it on a quality TV screen as well. So, I mean, that's, I think, that bit of savvy marketing there. But he is definitely a true believer in old-style cinema. He hates 3D. He hates the gratuitous use of special effects. There's a lot of physical effects here. So I think, if you're into movies, you want to see them on as big a screen as possible. So, but it's not absolutely essential at the IMAX. I would say, though, that you might not want to watch it at a drive-in. If this shows up at a drive-in, as much as I enjoy going to drive-in movies, and I really do, I saw one a couple of weeks ago, I think you really need to focus on what's happening on the screen without any distractions at all. And drive-in movies tend to have sort of additional distractions, but that's the only sort of caveat I would give.
Have you been in the theater since they've reopened?
Yep, I saw Tenet in the theater last week. So, there was only like 5 other critics in the whole. It was actually in the IMAX theater at Scotiabank. There was maybe 5 other people in the room, so I felt safe. But to be totally honest, I would not want to be in a crowded theater myself right now.
That's just it. What have you heard about the precautions that they're taking? I mean, obviously, Cineplex asked for permission to have 50 people in the theater as opposed to in the building, which was one of the first restrictions. What do you think of the precautions that people are taking right now in going to the theaters? And the theaters are taking?
I think they're good and I think they're well intentioned, but I have to say that as long as you're not sitting near somebody, that's a good thing. But the thing that kind of troubles me is the fact that you can take your mask off and eat popcorn. Because to me, it's like, well, that would be like your get out of jail free card, right? You could just take your mask off and eat popcorn the entire movie. So like I actually took in a coffee with me, but I drank it through a straw because I didn't want to take my mask off. So it worked quite well, actually. I recommend it. It's kind of an odd thing to do, but I would not be happy being in the theater with everybody with their mask off eating popcorn. And that's how they have to survive, right? So I see a real problem there.
Now, this is the thing. Obviously, people are trying to figure out what their comfort level is. I think that the movie business is in such a strange place with this pandemic. I think that Cineplex is also in a really tough spot right now. I'd like to talk a little bit about them. I mean, they lost $99 million this past quarter, I believe. And they really need to get people back into theaters. Do you think the upcoming slate of films is enough to get people back?
That's what they call the $64,000 question, right? I mean, I guess the way to phrase it is, what movie are you literally dying to see, right? Because, when they talk about COVID, they talk about crowded areas like places like bars, right, and gyms. I'm not sure on the scale where movie theaters come in, but it would have to be very few people in a movie theater for me to feel comfortable about being inside a movie theater. If everybody was masked and kept their masks on the entire time, then I would be more comfortable. But I'm just not happy with any scenario that has people sitting around in a closed space without their masks on. It just doesn't seem smart to me. So, and I don't see any films. I think Tenet is definitely a film you're going to want to see. I just told you a couple of minutes ago, don't see it at a drive-in, but if it means not seeing it at all, then go see it at a drive-in. I mean, definitely see it at a drive-in rather than not see it at all. But it's going to be a very difficult year. There's a lot of interesting movies coming up and TIFF's coming up very shortly. But the question is, how much do you want to indulge your love of film and also potentially risking your health?
The Cineplex CEO said something on BNN the other day. I'm not sure if you saw this clip. It's a little bit of a long quote, but I want to read it to you, okay?
Sure.
He said, "We are the engine that drives the train. We basically create the awareness with the guest, and we also create demand for sequels for the studios to create. And then they can design games and theme parks behind it. And you need that as a promotional vehicle to keep these movies constantly coming into theaters. I always use the adage is trading dimes for nickels when you go directly to streaming, because you don't have that $40 billion worth of revenue from theatrical releases around the world." What do you think about that? Is he right?
I think the guy's absolutely right. I mean, there's always been a cachet about movies that you're willing to leave your house, you're willing to spend money on parking and the ticket price and the concessions because it's going to be such a special experience that you want to have it in a theater. And I could talk for days, as any movie critic, about the different experience of being with an audience, right? I feel like I'm at cross purposes here because I'm saying I don't want a lot of people in the theater when I see stuff right now, but you do want people generally to be around you to experience that feeling because it's such, you can't replace that feeling in your living room. You just can't. The people are banging at the door and there's people walking to the room and everything when you're at your home. There's just so easily be distracted. And when you're in a movie theater, I think McLuhan referred to movies as, I think you've heard them as a cold medium because there was the involved, I probably had this wrong. There's going to be a McLuhan expert that's totally mad at me for getting this wrong, but Marshall McLuhan referred to how it's a unique experience to be watching the screen and to be engaging with that. I think it was a hot medium. You know what I mean? That guy that you just quoted, he's absolutely right because that creates the event aspect of it. It creates the buzz about it that you just can't do that with like a Netflix screen. I mean, you look at your Netflix screen and you're besieged by choices, most of which have titles with like one word, and trying to figure out which to watch, without that kind of, sort of advanced word that this is the thing you got to see. It's tough.
We'll be right back. What did you think about Disney's decision to put the new live-action Mulan on streaming?
I think they're cutting their losses. I mean, this is like they were going to bring it out, I believe, in March. They've proven that a family movie can work. Back in the spring, when Universal brought out Trolls World Tour, that was about to open in theaters. They brought it to their version of premium VOD, video on demand, and they did quite well. I think they got over $100 million, if I'm not mistaken. But it's definitely the lesser choice. But rather than sit on it forever or risk piracy or just losing the momentum, it might be better to cut your losses and go streaming. But I think there's some experimenting happening as well. Like the people in these boardrooms are saying, look, we got to figure out where we're going with this, and let's experiment with a few titles. The family titles seem to do better, because you're home with your kids anyway. So if you're watching a movie like that, and I should say Mulan is not strictly a children's film, but it's an action film with a young female heroine. So I think a lot of this right now is just experimentation to see what will fly.
You already mentioned it. I think we have to call it a comeback. This pandemic has brought back drive-ins. What do you think about that?
I'm delighted about it. When I was a kid, I used to love drive-ins. My dad would pack the family into a rolled station wagon. I come from a very large family, 8 kids. And so I remember the price was I think it was like $5. There used to be I grew up in Scarborough. I think you did too, right?
I did, yes.
There used to be one at Victoria Park and Shepherd called the Northeast Drive-In. And it was really Northeast, and there was nothing I liked better than going to see a movie there. My younger siblings would go in their pajamas and they'd sleep in the back of the station wagon, and it was just really something. And I went to see the Talking Heads movie, Stop Making Sense. Ontario Place has a new drive-in, which is actually a really good drive-in. When I heard that they were doing it in the parking lot at Ontario Place, I thought, oh my God, right along the Lakeshore Boulevard. But it's actually tucked away inside Ontario Place. And it's pretty easy to get to, and it's a great experience. I had a wonderful time. So I love drive-ins. I'll go to drive-in any day of the week.
The only thing about me is it seems like they've, the price has gone through the roof.
Well, in terms of TIFF, they have, yeah. But TIFF's always expensive anyway. But I think the average price for a drive-in, I don't think it's dramatically different from theaters. The one I saw last week was a free city screening, by the way. So I didn't buy a ticket and I can't comment on prices.
I really love if you could break this down a little bit for me, because I saw the trades go kind of crazy over it. And I'm wondering if it has any effect here. There's a big story a couple weeks ago about AMC Theaters and Universal Studios in the US, where they agreed to shorten the exclusive theatrical window to just 17 days for that studio's films. Now, I know around the world, I think that there are tons of rules about this, many, like in France, to protect theaters. Can you tell me, is this a big deal, and is there any effect for Canada?
It's a huge deal. I mean, that's like a sacred tenet, to use that word against the movie going, that you have to have, windows are what the industry jargon for the space between, when a movie shows in a theater and then when it goes to premium video and then regular video and then finally television and DVD, Blu-ray. So all these windows are very important. And the shorter you make the window, the less likely somebody is to pony up the cash to go and see it at a movie theater, right? So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was 90 days was the window that people were working on. Now to shorten it to 17, you're basically saying, well, only the diehards are going to go see it in a theater because you might as well just wait and see it on your TV set. So that's a huge change. Could have pretty much seismic effect on movie theaters. I think 5 years from now, if current events hold, I think 5 years from now, you'll see a lot fewer movie theaters.
Wow, that's really scary. The other question I have is that, obviously big studios are trying to save tentpoles and blockbusters. Feels like smaller and indie films have just been absolutely crushed by this.
They have. This is a trend that's been going pre-pandemic as well. I mean, it was becoming more and more that a lot of the films that would normally have gone to like date night type movies, like a good example was a couple of years ago, the movie Crazy Rich Asians? That was originally supposed to go to Netflix, but I believe it was Kevin Kwan, the guy behind it, said, no, I want this to go to theaters. It actually did very well, but it proved that there's still an audience for that kind of, the expression of movie. You go out with your spouse or your significant other to go see a movie just for the night out. It's been hollowed out a lot pre-pandemic, and I think the stuff I've been reading and the stuff I've been hearing anecdotally is that whole middle-sized movie, you have the horror films at one end, but the cheap horror films are doing very well at drive-ins. They've actually racked up record numbers at drive-ins, but then you have blockbusters, which are going to do well pretty much no matter what. And then in between, you've got the stuff that often gets nominated for Oscars, which, that's going to be a real stress point for getting people out the door to go see something that they could just as easily wait 17 days for. That's a tough one.
What can you tell us about what TIFF is going to be like this year? I know you've been covering it for years, and I think usually by now you're watching already some of the hundreds of movies, right? So what's going on right now? You know what they say in it's quiet out there, too quiet? It's crazy. Normally this time of year, I'm ramping up at full speed. You know that from watching me in the office, like just watching films, preparing interviews, everything else. TIFF just announced, that some more movies that they had. Everything's been delayed by weeks in terms of what they announced, what they roll out. And they're going to be showing a combination of stuff at TIFF Bell Lightbox, their main headquarters, the Isabel Bader Theater up at U of T. They're going to have a couple of drive-in theaters, and then a lot of stuff will just be online, just like they have a new platform to show stuff online. So it's just going to be unlike any TIFF you've ever seen. I don't think there's going to be any parties that I know of. I don't know of any parties right now.
any kind of public parties. I'm sure there'll be viewing parties at home and things. So many aspects of TIFF just aren't going to happen. But then on the other hand, they are going to field about 60 features and I think 36 short films, so close to 100 films. But that's about a third of what they normally have. They normally have close to 300. So that's a big chunk out of what they normally have. But I think they can manage that. I think that they'll keep the fire burning, basically. I think they're hoping that they can keep the momentum going enough that this time next year there will be a vaccine and people will be heading back to theaters and that they can get back to normal. So I'm really impressed with them because so many festivals this year basically bowed out. I mean, Cannes couldn't mount a thing and South by Southwest couldn't put one on. They canceled that. Carno had to cancel their events. So TIFF has decided to bravely forge ahead. Telluride had to cancel. So it's a big roll of the dice, but I admire them doing it.
Any films of interest?
There's one called Nomadland, Chloe Zhao, who I quite liked her earlier stuff. The Rider, her earlier film. This is a film that's really much speaks to our time about people sort of retirement age who find themselves having to drive across North America in trailers and just live and doing piecework. They're doing gigs all around North America. This one stars Frances McDormand and David Strathairn, and it's actually based on a book that I'm reading right now that came out a couple of years ago. That one is going to have a simultaneous world premiere both at Venice, which is going ahead, and in Toronto on September 11th. There's a lot of cooperation between the festivals now. They used to be at each other's throats, but now they're cooperating, and so you have this kind of joint world premiere of this film. I think that's definitely an Oscar contender from the looks of things. I mean, it has that kind of look about it. There's Francis Lee's Ammonite. It's a film of illicit romance starring Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan. I think that's another potential Oscar movie. That was originally chosen for this year's Cannes Festival, but it's been canceled. Now it's coming to Toronto. That Cannes was canceled. I think it's interesting that Halle Berry, she has got her directorial debut called Bruised. It's a sports drama, a boxing movie in which she also plays, I believe, the lead character, the boxer. So there's some good stuff. Not the absolute, banquet of Oscar bait that you normally have. So it also gives a chance for some films like the more indie kind of films to have a real spotlight. So in every single regard, this year's TIFF is going to be something you've never seen before. It's going to be something really unusual.
This is absolutely fabulous for us. I have one last question. It's a bit of a big one, though. What do you think this effect going to have on movie production and also how movies are made moving forward? I think one of the things is are there going to be tells? Are we gonna, one of the things I talked to a film producer a while back was saying how instead of 15 extras, maybe you have 4 just because of social distancing stuff. Do you think there's going to be things that we're going to be able to see on screen that either remind us of this or will be tells of the pandemic moving forward?
That is another one of those great questions that we're not going to know until we're actually there. But I've read the same stories as well about how there are going to be fewer members of the cast. There's going to be fewer scenes, probably fewer takes. So everything that they can to reduce contact and to reduce unnecessary stuff, they're going to do so. That actually, in some way, that could play in favor of a small indie film because indie films can be much lighter on the ground. Fewer people, less equipment, fewer days filming and stuff like that. So that might be one saving grace for indie film, which otherwise is in big trouble. But I think that blockbusters will always find a way to get made. I mean, there was talk about making films in New Zealand, more films in New Zealand, because they seem to have beaten COVID, right? And then the latest word out of New Zealand is wait a second, not so fast. We haven't beaten it here. So everybody's trying to figure out where to move next to beat COVID, and COVID keeps coming up with new ways to kind of outfox us. But I know that anywhere, this is the one thing you can be absolutely sure of. If it makes money, they'll keep doing it. And if it doesn't make money, they won't do it.
Peter, this has been really, really great. It's been a real pleasure to chat with you again. Thank you so much for your time today.
No problem. Good to talk to you.
Peter Howell is a former movie critic for the Toronto Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Mudhar, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Foso. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.